In 1929, a group of women lit cigarettes at the Easter parade. They thought they were being rebellious. Turns out they were just part of a marketing campaign. A man named Edward Bernays had paid them to do it. He wasn't just selling tobacco. He was selling an identity. The idea that smoking made you a liberated woman. And it worked. The cigarette didn't have any actual significance. People were simply hungry for something that had meaning. And that hunger never went away. It just got modernized. Over the last 100 years, the things you align with your personality, like your taste, your preferences, the brands you love, and the content you watch, these have all been quietly assembled for you, first by advertisers, then by platforms, and now by algorithms that know you better than you know yourself. But how did we actually get here? Before Edward Bernays, advertising was boring. You made shoes, told people they were sturdy and affordable, and then they bought them if they needed shoes. That was it. The relationship between a product and a person was functional. You needed something. Someone sold it to you. The transaction ended. Basic supply and demand. However, Bernays looked at that system and saw a ceiling. There are only so many shoes a person needs. Only so many bars of soap. If you're selling based on what people actually require, you run out of customers fast. Industrial capitalism needed people to keep buying, but people only keep buying if they keep wanting. And Bernays figured out how to make them want. He'd learned the technique during World War I, working for the Committee on Public Information, the US government's official propaganda weapon. His job was to sell the war to the American public, and he was really good at it. After the war ended, he made what he later described as a simple observation. The same methods that could mobilize a nation for conflict could be applied with equal facility to peacetime business. So he invented modern public relations. Not the kind that responds to crises, the kind that creates them, or more precisely, creates circumstances. Staged events designed to look spontaneous, generate press coverage, and shift public behavior without anyone realizing they were being managed. The cigarette campaign was his masterpiece. At the time, women didn't really smoke in public. It was considered taboo. The American Tobacco Company wanted that to change because it meant doubling the market. Bernays consulted a psychoanalyst named A. Brill, who told him cigarettes could be positioned as symbols of male power, and therefore, for women, as symbols of liberation. So Bernays hired a group of debutantes, including his own secretary posing as a women's rights advocate, to march in the Easter parade holding lit cigarettes he called torches of freedom. Photographers were set up in advance. The press covered it like a real cultural moment, and overnight, a consumer product became an identity marker. Now, to be fair, some historians point out that Bernays was also a genius at writing his own legend. Middle-class women had already started smoking in public in smaller numbers before 1929, and the press coverage at the time may have been more modest than Bernays later claimed in his memoirs. But the technique itself, attaching a product to a deep psychological desire and staging the moment to make it feel organic, that was real. And it scaled. He did it again and again. Ivory Soap ran carving contests for children to link cleanliness with creativity and cultural progress. Dixie Cups used the fear of germs, tying shared drinking cups to the threat of disease as a way to sell disposability as a marker of hygiene. The United Fruit Company hired Bernays to reframe a corporate land dispute in Guatemala as a communist threat to the United States, helping manufacture the conditions for a CIA-backed coup in 1954. And when the bacon industry wanted to move more product, Bernays got doctors to endorse a hearty breakfast as medically necessary. None of this was about the product. All of it was about making the product feel like part of who you were. And there's a line from a Wall Street banker named Paul Mazur that captures exactly what was happening beneath all of it. Writing in 1928, Mazur argued that the American public must be trained to desire and want new things even before the old had been entirely consumed. Trained to desire, not persuaded. Trained, like a reflex. That sentence is the blueprint for everything that followed. Here's what Bernays set in motion, even if he didn't fully see it. Once products stopped being about function and started being about meaning, the person buying the product changed too. You were no longer someone who owned a bar of soap. You were someone who signified something based on the soap you chose, the brand you wore, the drink you held, the car you drove. These became a language, and your identity became the sentence you were creating out of consumer choices. Sociologists have a term for this. They call it the consuming self, a subject whose identity is built from a web of purchasable signs, not from internal values or character. What brand of coffee symbolizes sophistication? What style of clothing suggests that you are rebellious? Which app proves that you are mindful? These elements aren't inherent. They don't originate from within. They are sourced from a market, one that continually offers new components for your assembly. Now, this is where it gets uncomfortable. When identity is built out of external signals instead of internal ones, the self becomes something that needs constant maintenance, constant refilling. You can no longer be someone. You must constantly play a character, a role defined by the right purchases, affiliations, and tastes. And what happens when you can't keep up? Research shows a direct relationship between low self-esteem and conspicuous consumption, overspending on visible goods, specifically to signal status. People who feel they fall short socially tend to buy their way into perceived belonging. Those with fragile self-perception, especially traits associated with vulnerable narcissism, use luxury brands to compensate. The product becomes a patch over a wound that the marketplace itself helped create. Some social scientists have described this as an anthropological mutation. The human subject is no longer defined by what they do or believe. They are defined by what they display. And the thing being displayed is disposable by design, because the system needs you to keep buying the next version of yourself. For decades, this ran on television, print, and billboards. It was powerful, but it had limits. You could change the channel. You could ignore the magazine. The marketplace could shape desire, but it couldn't see inside your head. Then the internet arrived, and the marketplace learned to read your mind. In 2013, a team of researchers led by Michal Kosinski published a study that should have changed how every person thinks about their phone. They analyzed Facebook likes, just likes, nothing else, and built a model that could predict personality traits using the standard Big Five framework: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The accuracy was startling. The model's precision in predicting traits like openness, extroversion, and intelligence was so high that it rivaled the reliability of standard psychological assessments, the kind administered by trained professionals in controlled settings. In some cases, the algorithm's read on your personality was nearly as consistent as the test designed to measure it. The model could also predict political affiliation with 85% accuracy, gender with 93%, and ethnic origin with 95%. And all it needed was your digital behavior. But here's the part that makes the data feel almost surreal. Some of the strongest predictors made no obvious sense. One of the best indicators of high intelligence in the dataset? Liking curly fries. Not a complex or academic topic. Curly fries. The algorithm doesn't work the way a human would. It finds patterns buried so deep in the data that no person could see them, and it uses those invisible patterns to build a portrait of who you are. And that portrait is disturbingly accurate. A 2015 follow-up study showed that, with just 10 Facebook likes, the model could judge a person's personality more accurately than a work colleague. With 70 likes, it outperformed a friend. With 150, it beat a family member. And with 300 likes, it was more accurate than a spouse. But what does all of this mean? Well, it turns out an algorithm that has never met, spoken to, or looked you in the eye can read you better than those closest to you. And that was 2013. The systems have only gotten more precise. Modern platforms don't need you to tell them anything sensitive. They infer it. Meta collects thousands of data points per user. They know how long you pause on a post, what time you're active, how fast you type, and what you almost clicked on but didn't. Platforms categorize users into behavioral profiles. Your engagement patterns become a psychological fingerprint. And the system doesn't just observe, takes advantage of what it sees. Algorithmic recommendation systems, the engines deciding what content you see next, have evolved from simple pattern matching into sophisticated architectures using deep learning and graph neural network. These models don't just match you with content you liked before. They capture non-linear relationships between your behavior and your likely future behavior. They adapt in real time to your feedback. And this is where identity stops being something you build and starts being something the platform builds for you. Researchers describe a phenomenon called identity drift. In machine learning, the term refers to how a model's internal parameters shift over time. But applied to human users, it describes something more personal: the subtle, rational adjustments a person makes to align with what the algorithm rewards. You post something, it gets engagement. You post something similar, more engagement. Your choices begin to shift subtly, not as a true reflection of your identity, but as a response to the expectations of the system. Each adjustment is small, each one makes sense in the moment, but over time, the person making the choices has quietly become someone else. And the more you delegate, allowing the algorithm to choose your next song, your next article, or even your next opinion, the more passive the relationship becomes. Studies on young people and recommendation systems found that prolonged exposure to curated feeds has long-term consequences for cultural openness and democratic participation. The algorithm doesn't just give you what you want, it narrows what you're capable of wanting. One group of researchers described the process in starker terms. They argued that prolonged interaction with digital services creates digital twins. In other words, the algorithm doesn't just mirror your behavior, but actively reorganizes your memory and reshapes how you understand your own past. The platform doesn't store your history passively. It decides what gets surfaced, and over time, it shapes how you see your own reality. This gets even more visible when you look at people who create content for a living. There's a phenomenon known as audience capture, and researchers have described it as one of the quickest routes to losing yourself online. Picture this scenario. A creator posts content. Some of it does well, some of it doesn't. The algorithm ends up rewarding certain types of posts, usually the more emotional, simplified, or controversial versions of what the creator originally intended. As a result, the creator notices. So, they lean into what the numbers reward. And they do it again and again. There's an analogy from economics that captures the dynamic perfectly. Keynes' beauty contest. The idea is that people stop picking the face they find most beautiful and start picking the face they think everyone else will find beautiful. Creators do the same thing. They stop making what they care about and start making what they think the audience wants to see. This results in the over-justification effect. This is where external rewards like view counts and likes gradually override the internal desire for genuine expression. Studies on audience entanglement describe the toll. Creators report feeling an oppressive dependence on metrics. Some describe feeling like a crumpled-up ball of paper, despite what looks from the outside like enormous success. The platform rewards them, the audience applauds them, and inside, they feel hollow, because success comes at the cost of their identity. This is the personality-to-content pipeline in its purest form. The self goes in, content comes out, and the person in between slowly disappears. Now, audience capture explains what happens to creators. But what about the other 2 billion people? For them, the mechanism is different. It's not necessarily about producing content, it's about consuming it, compulsively, endlessly, and by design. Multiple state attorneys general have filed lawsuits against Meta, alleging the company built what the filings describe as an addiction machine. The core claim is that Meta dedicated vast resources to understanding youth psychology, specifically to exploit what the filings call developmental vulnerabilities through platform design. Internal documents tell the story. Meta's own Instagram Teen Well-Being Study from 2019 noted explicitly that app addiction was common among teenage users. Internal surveys found that teens reported feeling powerless to stop using the platform and regularly sacrifice sleep to stay connected. According to the filings, When researchers flagged these findings, someone allegedly instructed them to alter the data to soften what it showed. The platform's engagement features read like a checklist of behavioral manipulation. Infinite scroll eliminates stopping cues, the natural breaking points that let your brain decide whether to continue or stop. Push notifications create intermittent reinforcement, the same reward pattern that keeps a gambler at a slot machine. Ephemeral content generates fear of missing out. Autoplay keeps you watching without ever making a conscious choice to continue. And beauty filters distort self-image in ways proven to lead to body dysmorphia among young users. On March 25, 2026, a jury in Los Angeles found Meta and Google liable for harm stemming from these designs. The plaintiff, a 20-year-old woman identified as Kaylee, had developed a debilitating addiction to Instagram and YouTube during her childhood. The jury awarded $6 million in damages, $4.2 million from Meta and $1.8 million from Google. Legal commentators called it an industry inflection point because it shifted the argument from the content on the platforms to the design of the platforms themselves. The features weren't incidental. They were the product. And here's the part that ties the whole story together. These features don't just keep you scrolling, they keep you performing. Every like is a signal. Every share is a declaration. Every piece of content you linger on tells the system who you are, and subsequently, the system tells you who to be next. The addiction machine and the identity machine are the same. While the algorithm quietly narrows who you are, the marketplace loudly celebrates your individuality. Brands like Sephora have reorganized their entire data infrastructure around hyper-personalization. A tool called Pantone Color IQ scans your skin tone using AI and matches it against a database of over 10,000 shades. A virtual artist feature uses augmented reality to pre-populate looks based on your style preferences, with over 200 million shade trials by 2018 alone. So naturally, in-store salespeople equipped with the My Sephora app can see your full purchase history before you've said a word. The company describes this as serving the individual. In practice, it treats personal preference as a prediction problem. Your behavior becomes the thing the system mines. Your individuality becomes the product, and the product is sold back to you in the form of recommendations that feel personal but are designed to maximize your spending. Influencers operate at the human scale of this same system. Marketers now select them through psychographic filtering and lookalike modeling, algorithms that match influencer audiences to brand targets based on behavioral overlap. The influencer's job is to perform what is coined performable authenticity, the act of appearing genuine while functioning as a delivery mechanism for commercial messaging. Discovery is driven by data analytics. Attribution is tracked across the full purchase funnel. Even the influencer's audience is an asset to be audited. The creator-educator model goes even further by treating content itself as a customer acquisition channel. Revenue is described as only half the equation. The other half is using content to drive people into paid products, services, and communities. Your free time is the raw material. Your attention is the refinery. And your sense of identity, the feeling that you chose this, that this is you, is the finished product being sold back to the system. Let's pull all of this back. 100 years ago, Edward Bernays figured out that you could sell more products by attaching them to desires instead of needs. So identity stopped being about character and started being about consumption. The marketplace scaled. Products became signs. Brands became personality. The self became a thing you assembled from purchases and displayed for others, constantly updated and never enough. Then the platforms arrived. They didn't just sell you signs. They watched which signs you reached for. They built a model of your psychology more accurate than your own self-assessment. And they used that model to feed you content that reinforced the version of yourself they'd already predicted, narrowing your taste, curiosity, and capacity to want something the system hadn't already suggested. And the features that locked you inside, the infinite scroll, the push notifications, the variable rewards, these weren't side effects. They were the design, created to bypass the part of your brain that would otherwise say, "I'm done. I'll go do something else now." The displacement works through 4 channels that have been building on each other for a century. Symbolic substitution, replacing internal values with purchasable identity markers. Algorithmic capture, delegating your choices to systems that structurally narrow what you encounter. Psychographic inversion, the creation of a digital model of you that is more detailed and more influential than your own self-understanding. And compulsive reinforcement, platform design that bypasses conscious choice altogether. None of these required a conspiracy. Each step made rational sense to the people building it. Bernays was solving a business problem. The engineers were optimizing for engagement. The platforms were chasing growth. And the consumers, every single one of us, were looking for something to fill a gap that the system itself had opened. But here's the thing worth holding on to. The system is powerful, but it is not omnipotent. Knowing how desire is manufactured doesn't make you immune to it, but maybe it can change your relationship with it. Because when you start noticing, it's hard to stop. And the moment you see the pattern, stage distractions, the algorithm randomly showing you things you were literally thinking about, and the system influencing your opinions, you find yourself standing slightly outside the loop instead of inside it. And that's a different position to make choices from. The question was never whether your personality was influenced. Everyone's is. Even me. The question is, how much of what you call you was built by systems that profit from keeping you uncertain, hungry, distracted, and scrolling? And if it was, what would you change? Because the one thing the algorithm still can't do is want something on your behalf. It can predict what you'll click, it can model what you'll buy, and it can surface the version of reality most likely to keep you engaged. But it can't decide what matters to you. Not yet, anyway. That part is still yours. The question is whether you use it. But even if you decide to take that back, there's a second problem. The same platforms that shaped your personality may have also damaged the part of your brain that lets you focus long enough to change it. The system that stole your attention has a name, a formula, and a paper trail now entering federal courtrooms. We investigated how that works here.